Welcome to Comic Power. I am your host, Comic Killer 72. This segment today is called Wicked Wednesday. If you didn't know, Wednesday is the new release for new comics that come out every week. These are my recommendations for the best books to pick up on Wednesday. I will also name one book to be the speculation pick of the week. This week, I'm going to be especially tough on Marvel. If you are a Marvel loyalist, there's no crying. No crying allowed in comic book collecting. First up, DC is giving us All-Star Batman issue number 3 with writing by Scott Snyder and art by John Romita Jr. You couldn't ask for more, except for a Jock variant like this. He has a very distinctive style, and it works for the Caped Crusader. And then there's the Shalvey variant that shows him with his new sidekick, Duke Johnson. Next up is The Lost Boys number 1 of a 6-part miniseries. This is a comic adaptation of a cult classic vampire film from the 1980s. As you can see, the cover pays homage to the original movie poster. Next up is Supergirl number 2, and Brian Ching's art style is really working for this character and bringing some new fans over to it. Next up is The Sheriff of Babylon, issue 11 of a 12-part miniseries. It's based on true events that happened about a Florida cop that becomes a contractor in Iraq in 2004 after the fall of Baghdad. Tom King, the current writer of Batman, is actually writing this book. It's gut-wrenching and powerful. I advise you to try to find The Sheriff of Babylon number 1 from 2015. It's got a very thin print run and sells for about $15 on eBay. This miniseries is a powerful read. Next up is The Suicide Squad number 4. They're letting Jim Lee draw it but not write it, which is smart. He's not a good writer. The writing's in the hands of Rob Williams. Jim has given us his best art since early 90s X-Men, and I am impressed. I am not impressed by the Variant. They make Harley look like an escapee from the Russian circus. Rob Williams is busy because he's also writing Unfollow. Issue number 12 drops this week. It's about a dying social media billionaire who's leaving his massive fortune to 140 random characters, or whoever is still alive at the time of his death. The number on the far left is the number who are still alive at the time. They're knocking each other off to get a bigger piece of the pie. I can't recommend this title highly enough for you to try it out, but you may need to get the Volume 1 trade so you know what's going on. Next up, let's see what Marvel is up to, and that's going to be their cash cow Deadpool, with issue number 20 dropping this week. With his ongoing series and all his miniseries, you're going to get a new Deadpool every week. Whether you wanted it or not, you're going to get it. Next up is The Clone Conspiracy number 1 of a 5-part miniseries, and this Gabriel Delato art looks phenomenal. There's other variants to this, such as the Mark Bagley one here, with Spidey surrounded by some of his most infamous foes. I will have 2 scoops of this and ask for more. Next up, sound effect please. If you love Star Wars, I got your Star Wars right here. Starting with Han Solo number 4 of a 5-part miniseries. I don't know why they did a miniseries on this. He's probably the most interesting character in this whole universe. He should have an ongoing series. There's plenty of variants with this, but I like the photo variant shown here. This is the space pirate that everybody knew before they ever heard of Star-Lord. Next up is Star Wars The Force Awakens, issue number 5 of a 6-part miniseries. This is simply an adaptation of the movie to comic book format, so it's really intended for Star Wars fans that have to have everything Star Wars, even the comics. Next up is the speculation pick of the week. And that's going to be Darth Vader number 25. This is the final issue of this critically acclaimed series, and the whole run was absolutely spectacular. It may sound like a cliche at this point, but the story and art on the whole title run has been phenomenal. And of course there's going to be variants like this Dr. Aphra variant shown here, which looks just amazing. I think they dropped the ball on this variant shown here because it's so easy to spoof. It looks a lot like Rick Moranis when he played Darth Helmet on Spaceballs. Man, I love that movie. It's one of the best spoofs ever. R.I.P. to John Candy, and may the Schwartz be with you. But speaking of Aphra, her first appearance is going to be Darth Vader number 3. You want this book, go back and find it. She is destined to appear in a future Star Wars live action movie. It's going to happen. Bet on it. I'm always right about these type of things. Now let's compare those images again. Man, that never stops being funny. Okay, we've come to the part where I heavily criticize Marvel, so don't be too shocked. First to get trashed is the Great Lake Avengers number 1. It's a ragtag team of Avengers rejects. One of those rejects was Squirrel Girl, but it looks like that she is even too popular for them these days. So if they can't get Squirrel Girl, that shows you just how disastrous this is going to be. Nobody asked for this. It should never happen. Next up, which shouldn't happen, but it is happening, is Solo number 1. He's a D-list character in which Marvel tried to raise his profile by putting him on Deadpool's Mercs for Money team. I have no problem with this character, but he is strictly supporting. There's no way he should be having his own title. The only solo I want to see on Marvel Comics is Han Solo, and this guy ain't him. So this is another fail for Marvel this week. Next up, and sure to be controversial, is Gwenpool number 7. And before any of you fanboys say, oh, you just talking about it like that because you never read it, it's actually good and blah, 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 blah. This is strictly boardroom capitalist greed here. The character has nothing to do with Gwen Stacy in the first place. They're just using something from the Spider-Man universe teamed with a Deadpool type of look in pink. It's a very awful fad that will go away, and people in the future will look back on it and say, what the hell were they smoking? Pass. Up next is Mosiac number 1, and this is part of Marvel trying to push the Inhumans on us. As I mentioned before, Marvel does not own the movie rights to mutants, Fox does, and they're a competing studio. So the plan is to de-emphasize the mutants and raise the profile of the Inhumans by having new characters such as Mosiac. But there's no real true buzz for this character, but Marvel is giving him his own title anyway. He has the ability to jump from one body to another body. I never saw that before. Oh yes, I have. It's called DEADMAN. He was created in 1967 by DC. So Mosiac is an unwanted, lame Inhuman with DEADMAN's powers. Oh wow. Okay, now that I'm done bashing Marvel, next up is our report on independent comics and small publishers. First up is Briggs Land number 3 from Dark Horse Comics. This is a story about a community that wants to succeed from the United States and form their own country. But there's infighting when the leader goes to jail and his wife tries to take over and she meets resistance. This title is in development to become a TV show on AMC. Issue number 1 was my speculation pick of the week for August 17th, 2016. Be sure to get that, as well as the NYCC Comic-Con issue number 3 variant, which is going for about 15 bucks on eBay right now. It looks pretty good. Next up are some tremendous offerings from Image Comics. Starting off with The Fix number 6. This is a hilarious dark comedy about crooked cops. On the cover is Pretzels the dog. He's a drug-sniffing dog that works at the airport, and our heroes, in quotes, will have to sneak some contraband through the airport to try to beat him. This is probably the funniest thing I've read in comics in over 20 years. If you love comedy in your comics, then you'll really love this. Next up is Eclipse number 1. This is the second print. A solar event has turned the sunlight into deadly rays, and the few survivors live in nocturnal cities and use special suits. Next up is Monstress number 7. After a summer break, this critically acclaimed series is back. It was nominated for an Eisner for Best New Series, and the creative team is all female. The writer is Marjorie Liu, a novelist that found her way into comics, and the artist is Sana Takata. The art style is phenomenal. It looks like a mix of anime meets steampunk. The trade paperback was the number 1 seller in July, outselling Harley Quinn. So people are very interested in learning the backstory on this title. So go ahead and find issue number 1 if you can find it for less than $20, and that's a steal. Next up is Kill or Be Killed number 3. This story takes us inside the mind of a young man who decides to become a killer, but only those who deserve it. Think of The Punisher meets Kick-Ass, but underneath is a dark psychological thriller. It's found its audience because issue number 1 went to a second printing, and now it's going to a third printing. Issue number 2 is also going to a second printing. Ed Brubaker and Sean Phillips are a winning team together. Next up is Reborn number 1, and this teams up some real heavy hitters in the comics industry, which would be writer Mark Millar and artist Greg Capullo, who's most famous for his run on the New 52 Batman. This is going to be controversial as well because shown here is the 1 in 100 variant. And in 2014, the publisher of Image wrote an open letter to the fans saying they would never do ratio variants ever again. But this 1 in 100 release contradicts that. But let's face it, if two heavy hitters like Greg and Mark decide they're going to team up and they want a 1 in 100, then they're going to get it. Pre-sale, people were asking and getting $150 for this extremely limited variant, but you gotta be crazy to spend that type of money for a new book that just came out. So I respected Image's former position, but they caved on this one. They should never agree to it. How many retailers are going to order 100 regular issues of this just to get this one variant? If you insist on getting a variant of this issue, get this version that Jock did right here and save $145. There's also a surprise Todd McFarlane variant, which is selling for about $30 pre-sale. Spend wisely, young grasshopper. Next up, Titan Comics is having a good week, so let's give them some love. First up is the Chimera Brigade number 1. In 1938, a new generation of superhumans are born due to the side effects of secret chemical weapons, and they have taken control of the capitals of Europe. I love this premise and I love this cover, so yes to this. Next up is Hard Case Crime Peepland number 1. This takes place in Times Square in 1986. It's a murder mystery that must be solved in the land of porno theaters and strip clubs where crime prevails. This is part 1 of a 5-part miniseries, and the variants look great too. Next up is the Warlords of Appalachia number 1. This takes place about 30 years in the future, where there's a new confederacy which is crushed in the Second Civil War and only Kentucky holds out. It's being described as Southern Bastards meets Dune. I'll have some of that. Next up is the Rivers of London Black Mold number 1. This is horror but with a sense of humor about it. It kind of balances both. Next up is Norman, issue 5 of a 5-part miniseries. It's the story of an 8-year-old serial killer. This character has found his following. It's sort of like if you took Chucky and mixed him with the scheming of Cartman on South Park, you would have Norman. Expect to see more of this character in the future. And last but not least, Valiant Comics gets the last laugh with Britannia number 2. This takes place around 30 AD, and Antonius Axia is the world's first detective. He is sent to Britannia, aka England, by the Emperor Nero to investigate some strange developments there. Issue number 1 sold out and went to a second printing shown here. Peter Milligan, most famous for his work on Shade the Changing Man as the writer, so you know it's going to be good. That's about it for today. Thank you for watching Wicked Wednesday, where I review all the new comic books for a new comic day. Be sure to follow my blog at comicpower.net. On social media, follow me at facebook.com/comicpower.net and comicpower-universe.tumblr.com. And don't forget twitter.com/comicpowersub. I also sell comics on eBay at this link. This is Comic Killer 72 for Comic Power saying bye-bye. And don't forget to share this video, click on subscribe, give it a thumbs up, and tell everyone you know about this channel to help it grow. Thank you for your support.